The Haunting of Meredith Tunnel. Over a century ago, on a crisp October night, Emily Sapp was walking home from visiting her aging grandmother. Something she always enjoyed, even though her grandmother lived in the countryside, and Emily had to walk a few miles each way. She loved her time with her grandmother, and after her grandfather passed away, she seemed to cherish each moment even more so. On this particular visit, Emily was having so much fun chatting and listening to her grandmother tell old stories that she lost track of time. It had started getting dark, and she realized that she was going to be walking home alone in the dark. And she knew it was quite the journey back to her house in the town of Fairmont, West Virginia. As she set out, the full moon cast an eerie glow on the railroad track she followed, which was a shortcut that would take her through the dreaded Meredith Tunnel. Walking through that tunnel always made her feel uneasy, because of the darkness and the creepy feeling she would sometimes get while walking inside the tunnel. She knew most of her fear was just her imagination running wild, but as many times as she had walked through the Meredith, despite some eerie feelings caused by the shadows, she had always walked through the tunnel unscathed. And if she started walking a little faster, Emily felt confident that she could make it through before the nightly train arrived. As she neared the tunnel, the distant sound of a locomotive's whistle echoed through the night. Emily quickened her pace, determined to reach the tunnel, walk through it, and be on the other side before the train caught up to her. Little did she know, a sinister presence lurked within the tunnel's shadows. A vicious man, hiding from the law, had taken refuge inside the tunnel. The Meredith Tunnel was built in 1914. It was nearly half a mile long with a single lane of tracks going through it. It was designed to be just wide enough to allow a train to pass through without slamming against the giant stone blocks that made up its walls and roof. Inside the tunnel, every couple of feet or so, there was a deep worker's cubbyhole that allowed for a rail worker to step into should a train pass by while he was working inside. And it was inside one of these cubbyholes that the man was hiding. He was wanted by police for a string of violent murders. He'd been in the tunnel for 2 nights, and he was sure by now he'd lost them. At first, he was caught off guard when he began seeing a shape walking on the tracks towards the tunnel. He was watching silently, like a predator, as Emily's silhouette, illuminated by the full moon, walked steadily towards the entrance of the tunnel. As she entered, he could hear the shuffle of her feet in the loose gravel between the rails of the track, echoing down the length of the tunnel. He studied her movements, following her shape with his eyes as she got closer to him. He slyly moved further back into the shadows of the cubbyhole, and suddenly, a blast of the oncoming train's whistle, much closer this time, its billowing sound getting trapped in the echo chamber of the tunnel until it dissipated, and the only sound remaining was the shuffling echoes of Emily's feet. He was now tracking her solely by the sound of her footsteps. He waited patiently as the sounds of her became closer and closer, waiting for his moment to attack. Silently, he held his breath so the sound of his breathing could not give himself away. He waited until she was close enough, and then with a deadly precision he lunged out from the cubbyhole, grabbing her. He was fast, and she was caught by surprise. When his hands reached her, he gripped her arm and the back of her neck with a great strength that was fueled by his killer's hunting endorphins. She shouted in surprise, and her voice filled the tunnel of its echo chamber. She fought back with reflexes and speed that surprised him a bit, but despite her struggle, he overpowered her. He grabbed her tighter, strengthening his grip and changing his footing for a better position to dominate her. He pulled her back into the cubbyhole and flung her hard against the cold, soot-covered brick wall. He slammed her hard, pinning her back to the wall. She felt one of his hands move and find purchase on her throat. He began squeezing her neck and cutting off her air while pinning her against the wall with the same arm. Then she felt this other arm slip away, and it felt like he was fumbling for something, perhaps in his pocket. Every few moments or so he would loosen and then tighten his grip on her neck, allowing her to breathe but keeping her in place. And then she suddenly realized what his other hand was fumbling with, as the sound of a wooden match hissed, and suddenly a bright yellow glow filled the cubbyhole. And she was looking straight into his face. Despite the horror of the situation, she was struck at how this man did not appear anywhere near as she had imagined, as if he would have been an old, toothless hobo. This man was young and strikingly handsome. Under other circumstances, she would have called him cute, but this feeling was fleeting, interrupted by his grip on her neck and the lack of air, and also by the look in his eyes. As the match's hiss quieted down and the flame began to flicker, she could see his eyes. She looked deep into them, and what she saw there was emptiness and madness. He suddenly smiled, and when he did, he gripped her neck a little harder, and then he said to her, "Oh, you're a pretty one." And then a blast of the locomotive's whistle wailing away, and this time you could hear the steady chugga, 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 chugga sound as the engine was quickly approaching. Once the sound of the train's whistle was over, the match went out, and they were in the darkness again. She felt his hand begin to fumble again, and she figured he was trying to get another match, but this time she heard the sound of a metal button snapping open, and then she heard the zing sound of what she was sure was a metal blade, the kind of sound a big kitchen knife makes when you rub the edge along something. And then she felt a small piercing pain in the middle of her chest, and it felt like he was poking her with the tip of the knife he had just drawn. And then he spoke to her. "I'm going to give you the mark now, so the master will be able to find you in the afterlife." She screamed out, and her scream reverberated frantically in the confines of the tunnel. And he laughed as if to answer her. He said, "Go on, scream as loud as you can. No one can hear you in here." And as if on command, she did scream. And when she did, he laughed louder, and then screamed himself, mocking her. All the while, the locomotive was getting closer. Chugga, 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 chugga. He began whispering chilling threats, claiming he would sacrifice her for Satan. And then he began shouting gibberish instead of words. Suddenly the train's whistle blasted so loud that she thought her head would explode, and the train was now in the tunnel. She screamed one last futile sound, but her screams were drowned out by the approaching train. In a final desperate attempt to escape, she managed to knee her attacker and break free. She felt his hand slip away. She half bolted, half stumbled out of the cubbyhole, and as she did, she fell and tumbled onto the tracks just as the train barreled through the tunnel, its deafening roar sealing her fate. The locomotive's wheel tore through her body, killing her instantly and scattering her remains along the tracks. When inside the cubbyhole, the man waited until the train had passed before emerging. The sound of the train now disappearing into the void of the night, replaced only with the scuffle sounds of his own feet on the loose rock. He muttered to himself, chuckling. How many was it now? 14? 15? He asked the empty tunnel. But no one answered except the echoes of his own voice. And then he asked, Who's keeping score anyhow? The killer began to walk towards the opening of the tunnel, in anticipation of the journey to find his next victim. And then he began to laugh. And the more he laughed, the funnier it became to him, and he laughed even harder. His maniacal laughter echoed through the tunnel, a haunting sound that lingered into the night. Today, the railroad tracks have been replaced by a hiking path. But Meredith Tunnel still stands. Legend has it that Emily's ghost haunts the tunnel, seeking revenge on her killer. And as Halloween approaches, locals claim they can hear the ghostly whistle of the old coal engine and the faint, eerie laughter of the madman who took her life. If you should dare to walk through Meredith Tunnel, be mindful of whatever could be hiding in the cubbyholes, and be careful, as you just might encounter Emily's restless spirit, forever searching for justice.